Hey guys, welcome to the Ramsey Paul Show. It is Wednesday, December 3rd. Thank you so much for being here. And as always, if you like the show, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends. And as you can see right here, if you want to write me, I'm at Paul Ramsey, P.O. Box 8093, Fayetteville, Arkansas 72703. And I want to do a shout out to Charles. Charles sent in a generous donation at the P.O. box. So thank you very much, Charles. I do appreciate it. And you could do that. Or another way you can support the show is Power Chat Live at Ramsey Paul. I do appreciate any tips I get. And I always encourage people to sign up for my Substack every Tuesday night. Last night we had a great roundtable. It's a lot of fun. Additional content. It's a way to support me on a monthly basis. Again, thank you very much for all my Substack supporters. All right, we'll get into the top news of the day. And as you can probably see from the thumbnail I'm going to create, Pete Hegseth is in some trouble potentially because of dropping bombs on suspected Venezuelan drug smugglers. And supposedly he gave an order to kill them all. And there was one incident where a drug boat was bombed, and there's like 11 people in the boat, but two people survived and they were swimming around in the ocean. And there was some controversy. There seemed to be an order to go back and kill them again, the people that were the survivors of the shipwreck, and what they call a double tap. Now, Pete Hegseth said he didn't give that order. He's trying to blame it on the admiral, but the admiral said that was instructions basically to kill them all. So the problem is this a war crime? Because based on the rules of war, if there's shipwreck survivors, you just can't kill them. You have a duty to try to rescue them. Like the say in World War II, a German boat is sunk and there's sailors in the lifeboats. The Navy, the U.S. Navy, would have to help them out of the water, and they'd be prisoners of war, but they wouldn't be executed in the water. So this brings up one issue: did Pete Hegseth commit a war crime? And the whole concept of war crimes, let me first discuss this, is a very European concept that's fairly modern over the past few hundred years for white people. It didn't exist in any other society in history. In other societies of history, if you conquer someone, you take their women as prizes, you rape them, you kill the children or take them as slaves, and you kill the men. That's how warfare operated through most of humanity. Indians, American Indians operated that way. Africans did, Asians, Genghis Khan. That was the norm. But around the Middle Ages in Europe, because of Christianity, they decided to make some rules of war. And it was still lax compared to today's standards. They still did a lot of horrible things. But basically, if you were in a knightly class in, let's say, either Britain or France, they would have a rule that people could surrender and you would take them, you just want to execute them, and you would basically pay a ransom to get your people back. I think once in the British, they captured the French king and they didn't kill him. They gave him back to France with a ransom. That's how the rules of war started. And there that continued through the years. And then we had like the Geneva Convention about how armies at war, they need to operate. And typically it was like a lot with prisoners of war. So you just don't kill prisoners of war. You have to treat them somewhat humanely. So if someone surrenders, you just can't shoot them. You take them in and then, feed them and clothe them. And then maybe there's prisoner exchanges. So this is the idea of the rules of war. And you try to avoid targeting civilians. That's another rules of war that came about. And again, it wasn't always done, but it was, at least that's the ideal. And in World War II, it was basically, at least with the Germans and the Western powers, it was respected. Germany didn't kill American prisoners or British prisoners. They treated them pretty well. And we treated the Germans pretty well. Now, Japan was a different story because the Japanese didn't really have that code of honor with the enemy. They would be very cruel to our prisoners. And with Germany and the Soviet Union, they had a lot of issues too. But in general, we respected that, and Hitler respected the Geneva Convention. Now, it kind of broke down at the end because we did target civilians, the United States and Britain. The major one was Dresden. Dresden was not a military city. It was an open city. It didn't have any air defense. There wasn't any manufacturing there or anything like that. But we decided to target that city that was just full of civilians and massacred like 100,000 Germans just out of spite, really. It was technically a war crime. If you want to read a little bit about that, Slaughterhouse Five by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. is an excellent book. He was actually in Dresden at the time. He was an American POW, and he was in a shelter, but he saw firsthand the devastation of that. And he never understood why that city was bombed by the Americans and the British. And there was really no good reason. It was just to kill civilians. And you could argue dropping the bomb in Hiroshima was also targeting civilians. It wasn't really a military target. So technically, that's, a war crime. But in practice, war crimes really don't mean anything unless you lose. I mean, if you lose, you're going to be prosecuted for war crimes. But if you're the winner, typically you're not prosecuted. I mean, there's a few exceptions, but no one went to jail because of Dresden or Hiroshima. So that's the advantage of winning. So even in European warfare, war crimes are mostly when two armies are fighting, and they kind of enforce it by saying, hey, we don't want our prisoners killed. So in return, we won't kill your prisoners. So it's kind of a mutually agreed upon thing. Or after World War I, both sides determined, hey, we're not going to use gas weapons, and not because they were inherently immoral. It's just it was hard to control and it damaged both sides. So they both said, hey, let's both agree not to use gas. And that it wasn't used in World War II, and Hitler didn't use gas, and neither did the Allies. So uh, that is how the war crimes are really set up. But in general, it doesn't really mean much unless you lose. So I don't really, from a moral point of view, have a problem of killing Venezuelan drug runners. I'm not going to shed any tears about that. But the bigger problem this brings up is we're not technically at war with Venezuela. I mean, we call them a terrorist, but drug smugglers aren't terrorists. I mean, we're really expanding the definition of the term terrorist. If you're dealing drugs, I mean, it may be a horrible thing, but that's a criminal matter. It's not really terrorism. And so they tend to lump everything we don't like under terrorism, and that gives us an excuse to kill people without arresting them or a trial. And that brings up all sorts of problems. So this is a problem with the foreign policy that is a neocon foreign policy, not American first. And let me explain that. The way the Constitution was set up in America, we don't follow it, but only Congress is able to declare war. And that's how it's set up. But we go beyond that, and the president has powers to kind of circumvent Congress, which I don't agree with, but that's where we are. And when we're trying to do regime change in Venezuela, and the facade, or at least the pretext, is, oh, well, because they have a lot of drugs that come into the United States. Well, if you're going to do by that standard, there's Mexico, there's Colombia, there's probably a lot of other countries before Venezuela. So that's just an excuse because we want to do regime change in Venezuela because, they were kind of a socialist, communist type of state. And I get it. I'm not a big fan of Maduro, but that should be their business. We shouldn't be meddling in their country. And when it comes to drug interdiction, that really shouldn't be a military matter. That should be a police matter. We should have the Coast Guard. We should protect our borders. That's how we deal with it, that sort of issue. So because we got involved in this pseudo war with Venezuela, that really no one asked for. That wasn't in the campaign. No one wanted to go over war with Venezuela. I guess, is it even a war? I don't know. And that's part of the problem. So we're not really at war. And if we were at war, maybe you can make more of an excuse for bombing these drug boats. But if we're not at war, that is a very questionable if it's legal. It probably isn't legal. And I get it. If you're strong, you can pretty much do whatever you want. But I still say that we should have a certain standard that we shouldn't be doing this. And it really doesn't look good. And Trump even backed away. He said, well, the first bombing of the boat I would have authorized, but I don't know about the second one. Because again, if you bomb a boat and people are helpless, you just can't go back and kill the people swimming in the ocean trying to survive. That's technically a war crime. So we'll see what happens with that. But this is a sign of a bigger problem of why are we even messing with Venezuela? This really shouldn't be our big issue. We shouldn't be messing with Ukraine, Russia, or Venezuela, or Iran, or China. That's not what people voted for. They voted for Trump to focus on America first and not be distracted with all these neocon wars that Rubio wants to get in or whatever. We don't need that. So that was probably the major story. All right. The second major story of the other day or today was Witkoff went to Russia to present a peace plan. And it really wasn't a peace plan, really. It was, they had like 28 talking points they put up together. And they shared them with Ukraine and also Putin. And the media is spinning this that Putin rejected the peace plan, but as it says here, Russia is clarifying that's not really the case. They said this is a useful document that there needs to be negotiations on, and then they could go through all the items. So there's like 28 points that the United States came up with. We'll get to Ukraine's response, but Russia looked at these points and they said, okay, this isn't really a peace document. It's like almost a list on a napkin, right? You know, we got to make it a little bit more formal, but there's some good ideas here. There's some bad ideas, but we can work with this, and we need to get actual negotiating teams set up and do this in a formal manner. That's how peace negotiations are done. They're not just done by, informally. You have to actually meet, and you have to have an agenda of what you're going to talk about, things you agree on, things you disagree on, and then you can work through it. That's how it works. That's how we worked in Vietnam when we negotiated with the North Vietnamese, and Korea the same way. This is how peace is done. It's through negotiations. So that's the Russian point of view. Now, so they didn't just flat out accept it, but they didn't reject it. They said, we just not need to negotiate it. Now, part of this is somewhat irrelevant because it looks like Ukraine has already rejected these points, because a lot of the Ukrainian negotiators, they met with Witkoff and I think Jared Kushner. I don't know how that guy wormed his way back into the the Trump administration. It's a son-in-law, I get it, but I don't know if I'm a big fan. And anyway, and Rubio, and they talked to the Ukrainians in Miami before Witkoff went to Moscow. I guess the meeting didn't go well, because basically one of the points was that Kiev or Ukraine, they need to get out of the Donbass and allow Russia to have that. And Kiev, they rejected any of that compromise. And the other big issue was NATO. And Russia is very insistent that Ukraine needs to be neutral. They can't be part of NATO because they consider that an aggressive towards Russia. And Ukraine, they rejected that. They said, no, they need to be part of NATO one day. So those are some of the big issues there. So the problem is there's nothing much to negotiate with. And I've said this for a long time. If you look at each of their positions, they're both very dug in. So you have Russia, and they consider the 4 eastern provinces in Ukraine to be Russian. And you may disagree with that, say it's immoral, but from the Russian point of view, the people that live there are ethnic Russians. They said those people voted to be part of Russia. They were being persecuted because of their language and their religion by the Ukrainians. They wanted to break free and join Russia. You may disagree with that, but that's Russia's point of view. That's their territory. And then the second point, Russia is kind of a red line, is they don't want Ukraine to be part of NATO because after the Soviet Union broke apart, we gave a promise that NATO would not expand. We broke that promise and we kept adding countries to NATO. And Ukraine was just a bridge too far because, again, historically, Ukraine has been part of Russia, part of the Soviet Union, and they don't want foreign troops and missiles or NATO missiles in Ukraine. So that was a big sticky part too. Those were probably the big two major items that's uh, causing the war. There's other issues too about the persecution of Russian speaking people in Ukraine and the Orthodox religion and the Russian Orthodox Church. The priests have been arrested by the Ukrainian government. And again, remember, Zelensky's Jewish. And so this has been a big problem with the Russians. And but the problem is Zelensky and the Europeans that back him, Starmer in Britain, Macron in France, Merz in Germany, they don't want anything. They take a hardline position. No, don't give up any territory to the Russians. And yeah, you can be part of NATO. Don't budge an inch. So Zelensky's not budging an inch. And then Russia, they're not budging an inch. They say those four territories, that's not up to negotiation. They're going to have them, and NATO's not up to negotiation. So there's no movement on either side. And if there's no movement, then it's resolved through the battlefield. War is a type of diplomacy. And right now, Russia is winning. Despite the propaganda, Russia, they have a bigger army now than they had at the beginning of the war. It's actually increased in size. They have more tanks now than they had at the beginning of the war. They have more missiles. They have a big production facility. They've ramped that up in Russia. They also get a lot of manufacturing arms from China and North Korea. So Russia's doing pretty well and they're advancing. They've taken a few key cities recently, despite the Ukrainian propaganda. The Ukrainian propaganda is just becoming silly. They lose a battle, but they declare a victory. But then the Russians show video evidence they control the town. So Ukraine's in a bad position militarily. And if Ukraine doesn't want to compromise, Russia's position is, oh, that's okay. We'll just win on the battlefield. So the only question for the United States should be what should be our role? Should we continue to give money and weapons to Ukraine? I say we shouldn't. We have no obligation to Ukraine. This isn't our business. This isn't America first. Ukraine's very corrupt. A lot of the money, there's been a big corruption scandal in Ukraine. A lot of the tax money we sent there went to these leaders and their offshore bank accounts. There's been like gold plated toilets. And meanwhile, most Ukrainians are very poor, but the people are looting our tax dollars. We give them money to build defenses, and a lot of that money's not, no defenses are built, but they go to fund bank accounts of these corrupt leaders. So there's a lot of problems in Ukraine. We don't need to be sending our tax dollars there, and we don't need to be sending weapons there. Now, if Europe wants to fight with Ukraine against Russia, let them. Although Europe is a very weak continent now. Ever since World War II, Europe has drawn down their armed forces because they've always had the United States to protect them. So why spend money on the military when they could spend it on social programs, right? So Britain is very weak now, as is France and Germany. They don't have much of a military at all. And they don't really have much manufacturing anymore because they've been outsourcing that. They've had the Green New Deal and all that type of stuff. So they're in a economic recession. They're not a manufacturing powerhouse, so they really can't provide a lot of weapons. So everything was based on the United States funding and supporting Ukraine. Without the United States, Ukraine would fall a lot quicker. Even with our support, Ukraine is going to fall. There's nothing we can do to stop it. We don't have enough weapons, and we're not going to get in the war directly. So we can continue to fund Ukraine, provide them with intelligence, but they're still going to lose. It's just going to kill more people. But it looks like that is where we're going on right now. And we'll see where that is. But I don't think there's a way to negotiate this. unless they change Zelensky, and maybe there'll be a coup, but it's just going to be decided on the battlefield until one day Zelensky will flee the country with his offshore bank accounts. He'll probably flee. One of his advisors already is a Jewish guy, fled to Israel, and a lot of criminals flee there because Israel covers for them. They take care of their own. Zelensky will probably flee to Israel. That will be the end result there. But I hope Trump just cuts loose from Ukraine, but I don't know if that will happen. But that's where we are right now. All right. All right. Now, a couple other things is this has to do with immigration. And I think people are starting to realize that diversity is not really our strength. And bringing in primitive people into your country does not enrich your country. It does the opposite. I've been saying this forever. That was always considered an extreme position. And now it's become more mainstream. And the United States, they've halted all immigration from 19 countries. And again, Somalia is one of those countries. It's been a disaster. Again, because there was a premise that all humans are the same, and that's not the case. There's differences in intelligence, differences in behavior. We're not all the same. There's a lot of diversity. And you just can't transplant people over and expect them to be like white Americans. And the further away you are based on language, religion, and race, the more difficult it becomes. And we're really seeing that. So Trump has seen that. It became, I guess, a huge scandal. I did my video a couple days ago about the Somalis there during COVID. They ran massive billions of dollars of fraud. Governor Walz did nothing about it, probably because he didn't want to be called racist. And so these are people that came into our country. I don't know why. We didn't want them here. They have their own homeland, and they've been nothing but trouble. And we see this all the time here. This is one of the Somalis here. And this isn't a one-off. We see this all the time here. Let's watch.
On probation for sexual assault is charged once again. This time, prosecutors say he picked up a woman he met on Snapchat and raped her at a hotel.
So this was a guy that's been arrested many times for rape, but again, he's from Somalia.
Hotel in Bloomington.
Now, prosecutors once called this man an extreme public safety risk, but he never spent a day in prison for his previous crimes. Fox 9's Mike Manzoni joining us from our newsroom now. And Mike, prosecutors signed off on plea deals in these previous cases.
Kelsey and Randy, a judge sentenced the Minneapolis man in those cases back in May, but he got credit for time served, so he never went to prison. It was all part of a pair of plea deals. This is the man we're talking about. His name is Abd.
I mean, it should be obvious. Someone named Abdel Mohammed doesn't belong in the United States, right? He'd be happier in Somalia, running around with the warlords where they can molest women at their heart's content. This guy, he doesn't belong here. He doesn't add to this country. He just preys on our women. Now, the reason he was not in prison is because he's black, and the leftists, Black Lives Matter, we got to keep these people out.
Mahat Billy Muhammad, but prosecutors say the 28-year-old uses the names Kareem and Altesto on Snapchat. And that is where investigators say he met his latest victim as well as his two previous ones. Prosecutors say he picked up his most recent victim in Mankato back in September and drove her to a hotel near the Mall of America where he took her phone, told her she wasn't leaving, raped her, and held her against her will for days. That's according to prosecutors. And
so this guy raped two people that we know of. He's probably done more. And this was his third victim, and he kept her for days, torturing her and raping her. And the piece of shit government did nothing to this guy because he is black and they don't want to be called racist.
Investigators used DNA to identify Muhammad as the suspect. His profile was already in the database from previous cases involving sexual assaults in Minneapolis in 2017 and another one in 2024.
So this is a problem that we're having that we don't, it's just outrageous. We don't need these people. They do not add value. And you could say, well, maybe some are good. Yeah, I don't really care. I mean, those good ones, they can be good in Somalia, right? We don't have an obligation to bring these people in. And it's just not a one-off. because whenever we bring these people in, whether it's in Minnesota or Sweden, the violent crime rate just goes through the roof, and it just becomes horrible. It becomes filthy, dirty, violent. And Trump was talking about this here too, about especially with Somalia. But I would include a lot of other countries here too. Here we go.
The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you. Okay?
I'm the same way. Like 88% are on welfare, even after being here a long time. Extremely high crime rate. They don't fit into our values. They don't give a shit about being Americans. They engage in massive fraud, massive violence. It's just not compatible.
Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country is no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country. I could say that about other countries too.
Right. Their country's no good because it's full of their people. I mean, that's the problem. It's not some magic dirt. That is the problem. And Trump is realizing this. The people make a country. So if you have a lot of shitty people that are violent and low IQ inbred, and you bring them into a nice civilization like Minnesota was, it was a very Nordic, white, low crime country, city or in state of Minnesota. And immediately it became extremely violent and dirty and corrupt.
I can say it about other countries too. We don't want them to hell. We have to rebuild our country. You know, our country's at a tipping point. We could go bad. We're at a tipping point. I don't know if people mind me saying that, but I'm saying it. We could go one way or the other.
Yeah, and he's right. And it just pains me that it took so long for mainstream people to understand this. I think we were at a tipping point long before now. I realized this long ago, and a lot of other people did too. Of course, we were called racist, evil, and tried to be silenced. And now people are seeing we were right. It goes back to the 1965 Hart-Celler Act that was imposed on America. And it has destroyed this country. The Hart-Celler Act, before then, we just took in primarily white Christians, but that changed it so we take in all these other people that are not compatible.
And we're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. Her friends are garbage. These aren't people that work. These aren't people that say, let's go, come on, let's make this place great. These are people that do nothing but complain. They complain. And from where they came from, they got nothing. You know, they came from paradise and they said, this isn't paradise. But when they come from hell and they complain and do nothing but bitch, we don't want them in our country. Let them go back to where they came from and fix it.
That should be our policy. Our policy shouldn't be cruel. It's, because they're always saying, oh, how dare you call Somalia garbage? It's a wonderful country. It's like, well, great then. You should be happy to go back there then. You don't need to be here. You're always complaining about white supremacy and all that. Well, go back to your country. There's no whites there. And there's Muslims, and you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever, do it there. Have fun. But you don't bring that here.
Thank you very much, everybody.
So, Trump, I get frustrated with him, but at times he can kind of spit the truth, and he was spitting the truth there. So good for Trump on that. Okay, guys, that's kind of the news update for today. Again, thank you very much. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.